Kia ora koutou. Tēnā koutou katoa ko Rosie Cameron tōku ingoa. Hi everyone, I'm Rosie. As Michael said, I'm a lecturer here at the University of Canterbury over in New Zealand. I would have loved to join you guys in Sydney, but it's the first day back at classes today, so I figured I probably need to be on the ground, especially since we're encouraging students to be back on campus more as well this semester. So I'm going to be talking about a computer adaptive practice activity that I've been running in my first year course this last semester. So this is working with some of the students who've just been talking about, the ones who didn't do as much maths in high school and are coming in wanting to do engineering or other STEM courses. So this is sort of a catch-up course. And so the computer adaptive practice that I'll talk about kind of fits into that. Nope. Okay, so the Math 101 course, I've been looking at redesigning the last couple of years, sits in as a prerequisite to go into engineering maths or computer science. And so these are the students that there's a huge spectrum of background knowledge that they're coming in with. So some have only just missed out on the calculus credits that they need, or others haven't done maths since year 9 or 10, or maybe they changed into the statistics stream, which here in New Zealand functions as the sort of dummy maths instead of calculus stream. And then a lot of students are coming in, I'm not a maths person, I don't like maths, I just have to do this for my degree, those sorts of thought processes. So the course doesn't have any prerequisites, and pass rates previously have been really quite low. And so we're working on trying to change those pass rates. How can we support those students to succeed in this course? Ideally to go on to complete their engineering degree, but even if they don't complete their engineering degree, at least have more mathematics skills. So we start with rearranging equations and even some arithmetic, and we work all the way up to integration by substitution and some calculus. So there's quite a lot to fit into that 12-week course, which, as we've been discussing, is quite challenging for a lot of these students. So in redesigning the course, before I get to the computer adaptive practice activity that I'll talk about, a little bit about why I got there was one of the main targets in designing the course is to build student self-efficacy. So helping them to believe that they can succeed at this particular task, this particular question in front of them. So as many of you will have thought or read about self-efficacy, that improves student motivation and persistence when things get difficult. They're more likely to ask for help if they believe they can succeed. And then succeeding in something, achieving that performance goal, feeds back into self-efficacy. And of course, the teacher support plays a role in the self-efficacy as well. So I want to build this student self-efficacy, improve that for students, but also that obviously needs to go alongside the skill development. So mastering the core skills, so arithmetic with fractions, order of operations, factorising, those really foundational skills I want students to have really mastery of. And then repeated practice of other skills in the course, like the lots of practice at differentiating, integrating, rearranging things. And then another goal I have is maybe as a bonus, some students will realize that maths can be fun. So aiming high here. So the computer adaptive practice, or CAP quiz, is a Moodle plugin. So we run on Moodle as our LMS. And the CAP quiz uses an ELO rating system where a student plays against a question. So it's a sort of student and question are in opposition, and someone wins and someone loses. But the quiz selects one question at a time to give a student a 75% chance estimated of succeeding against that question. So from a student perspective, this is what the quiz would look like, is they see one question at a time, and they want to complete that question and click the check button. And you can see that up the top, I've got this progress bar. So I'm progressing towards earning those stars. And you can see that I've been working on this quiz for a little while, and I'm nearly at the point where I've achieved that first star. So I do this question and click check, and I got it correct. And you can see my progress bar has updated. So I've achieved that threshold for that first star, and now I'm already 6% of the way towards getting my next star. So it's given me a question that I'm fairly likely to get right based on my current rating. And then if I get a question wrong, it might give me another question. You can see it's fairly similar, but I've got this one wrong. And my threshold, my rating dropped. So I've gone backwards a bit, but that just means it will give me another question after that. I click next and get the next question. And it will keep giving me questions until my rating reaches the desired threshold of the 3 stars. So the idea is that it chooses one question at a time so that each individual question you get is not too difficult. And then if you get questions wrong and your rating decreases, then you'll get given easier questions. And as your rating increases, you'll get given harder questions. So I'll talk a little bit about the setup, so the back end of the quiz, so we can see kind of how it's all working together, and then a little bit about how I've used it within the structure of the whole course. So some equations that we want to see. So the ELO rating works. So ELO rating comes from chess tournaments. So you want to keep track of different players and how they rate against each other. If an expert player plays against a beginner, then it's not really a surprise that the beginner loses. And so you don't want them to lose too much in their rating. But if you imagine that the beginner player wins against the expert, then you want them to have a larger increase in their rating because they've achieved a harder feat. So here we've got a student J playing against a question, and the question and the student both have a current rating. And we count the student winning if they get the question correct, and the student loses if they get the question incorrect. And then based on that, the student rating changes according to this formula here, the theta hat. So E of SJ is the probability, the expected probability of the student winning against that particular question. So if they win against a question that was easy for them, then they only get a small increase. If they win against a question that was hard for them, they get a larger increase. And then K is a scaling factor that we can set separately. So I'll show that, I think, on the next slide. So we can change that volatility in the student rating and how much that changes based on wins or losses. And so the estimated chance of the student winning against that particular question is some function that I haven't included here, but you can look it up in the Klinkenberg paper that I've linked there. But that paper is also linked on the Moodle plugin site. So you can just Google for CAP quiz and the Moodle plugin site will come up. And so what we do is we set a chance of success at 75%. And so then that means that the quiz is going to choose a question with rating. The question rating will be about 200 points less than the student rating. And so that means we need to set the starting student rating, and we set the starting question rating, kind of estimating what question we want students to start with. And then the quiz updates that each time a student attempts a question. So at the back end, we set the default user rating. So that's our theta J that students start with. And then we set the threshold that we want them to meet to get each of the stars. And then I've said I want students to achieve 3 stars as the goal. But you can set the number of stars and you can set the passing number of stars that you want students to reach. then I'll talk about question rating next. So then you add questions to the quiz, and you set the rating for each question. So if a student's starting with a rating of 1200, the first questions they're going to see are the ones of around rating of about 1000. So in this quiz, students are going to start with a question like multiplying fractions or comparing two fractions, about question 9 or 10 on that list. And then if they get that question wrong, they're going to go back to easier questions. And if they get that question right, they're going to go on to harder questions. You can also see here that obviously I didn't set question 8 to have a rating of 1040.34. But what's happened is that last semester I had 500 students doing this question bank. And so the question ratings have updated based on that first cohort going through and how likely they were to succeed or to get these questions correct or incorrect. So this question rating I set an initial rating and then it's updated based on the real data of these 500 students going through the course. So I'm reasonably confident that these numbers are a pretty good starting point for the next cohort coming through this semester. So then we've got the initial student rating is set and the question rating is set. And so we want to also set that volatility, that scaling K factor. So down at the bottom, I've set the student K factor to be 30. So I want the student rating to change by some moderate amount as they go through the quiz. So I think in practice, as they go from 1200 points to 1300 points, so that first star, I think worked out to be about 10 questions if they get them all correct going through. So they get 10 questions right, and then they get that first star. And then it takes a bit longer if they get questions wrong along the way, but they get that extra practice. And then I don't want a huge amount of volatility in the question rating because I've already given, I put my intuition about what questions are more difficult than others already. But I do want it to update a little bit as it goes through. And as students, say if lots of students get one particular question wrong, then it must be too hard. And so that rating will go down. I see someone's put the Moodle plugin link in the chat, so that's great. Thank you. Okay, so that's kind of the back end and the setup, and also kind of how the students see these questions. So the way I've used it is I've got 3 CAP quizzes in my course. And so each CAP quiz focuses on one particular skill that I want students to develop mastery in. So I don't want them to just pass or just be okay or sometimes be able to do these questions, but I want them to really just be able to sit down and factorize a simple quadratic equation and be certain that they'll get that right. So that's CAP quiz 3. CAP quiz 2 is some fraction arithmetic, so working with adding and dividing fractions. I think we get up to a little bit of like a linear equation with a fraction coefficient, which sometimes throws students at the start before they're used to working with fractions. And CAP quiz 1 is rules of exponents and order of operations. So I've kind of identified these 3 skills as really foundational. So if they can do these, I think that will make the rest of the course much easier for them. That is really just based on my experience teaching similar students with similar background. Really, it's just my intuition. So if someone has ideas or has seen research about what sorts of skills might be useful to pick out for these particular quizzes, that I'd be very interested to see that. So there's these 3 quizzes that they work through and they have to get the 3 stars on each of the quizzes. And once they get all 9 stars, then they get 5% towards their final grade. And then, so those are online and self-paced quizzes. So they just do them kind of in parallel to the rest of the course. And then I use Moodle completion tracking to sort of as an extra encouragement for students to make sure that they do that as soon as they can during the course. So what that looks like within the rest of the course, this is a snapshot from my Moodle page or Learn. So I see we've got this section, this tab on the left, that's our CAP quizzes. And as a student, I've gone in and I have completed all 3 CAPs. So once I get the 3 stars, then I get that green tick, and it appears on the right as well. So that's just every time I log into that Learn page, I see the reminder of I've got those 3 ticks, so I've got those CAP quizzes, or I see those ticks are missing, so I need to work on that. And then as we scroll down, there's some resources there. So if I'm working on CAP quiz 1, I might want to watch these videos as well. So that just means it's self-paced for students and runs in parallel to the rest of the course. And you can see on the left, I've got sections for week 1, week 2, week 3, etc. So in practice, that means in the first week or so of the course, I try to avoid fractions. We start using, in week 1, we do solve some quadratic equations, but I avoid getting them to factorize the equations until a couple of weeks in so I give them some time to catch up on those skills before I start saying, okay, now we're going to start working with fractions more, working with factorizing more. But we do get moving with solving linear equations that don't involve fractions, for example. So I see there's a question in the chat. Hang on. Yeah, so Matthew says that you could set the initial rating for all questions to 1,000, and then they're adjusted by the system as the questions are answered by students. Yes, I think you could do that. I was worried about my first cohort of students, though, entering the CAP quiz, and the first thing they see is one of the hardest questions. So it's going to give the first lot of students random questions, at least to start with. So ideally, I think maybe you'd take a pilot group of students and set them up to say it's going to be random questions, but after that, you'd have a good set of data for your question rating. But I was quite nervous about not giving the questions rating to start with. And Poe asks, is there correlation between performance in the CAP quiz and overall performance? I haven't looked at that data. I did encourage all students to finish the CAP quiz. And once they've finished all 3, that gets entered as a grade of 5%. I haven't yet, because the semester's just finished where I've done the first implementation. So I haven't yet looked at data about, did that help them overall? So I can't answer that yet, sorry. So in terms of the rest of the course, we've got these core skills modules. The CAP quiz forms one kind of component working towards self-efficacy and the skill development. So we're working on those foundational skills, and we're trying to build that self-efficacy by giving them these easy wins. Questions they're likely to succeed at, and then rewarding with the stars and that sort of gamification approach. And then alongside that, they've got weekly homework. So those are also done as quizzes, but that's fixed questions rather than the adaptive questions. But they do get that instant feedback because they're online using Stack, which is a whole other talk if you haven't used Stack before as a Moodle plugin. And then another piece is that in first semester, students have the option to change into doing the course over a whole year. So it's still worth the same number of credits towards their degree, and it still costs them the same in terms of fees, but they can stretch it out to a full year. So this year, I think I've got about 20 students who opted to do that. And last year it was 40 students. So a small number of students, but these are the ones who take the initiative and decide, actually, what I need to do is spend more time to consolidate this learning. But it does leave that option there for students to go, yes, I know this is a whole year course, but I'm going to decide to try and do it in one semester. And then another piece of the course is some collaborative workshops where we do some really fun problem-solving activities, and they're collaborative. And I talked about those at the workshop last year, if you were there. So that's kind of how the CAP quiz fits in, is it really tries to consolidate those really foundational skills at a mastery level. And so in our little diagram, it's that feeding from performance back into self-efficacy step is where we're really focusing on in these CAP quiz activities. And also when I was practicing with the CAP quiz, I had fun when I achieved the star, and I think some students like that as well. So kind of looking ahead, I mean, the big question is, does it change exam results, either in the short term or in the long term? Does it help fill in those misconceptions and skill gaps? It certainly does give us more lecture time for other content. It takes some of that early content and puts it online into self-paced co-requisite kind of model. So that means we get a little bit of extra time later on in the course. We can spend a bit more time on the calculus differentiation and things. Some feedback from students that I've heard so far, just sort of at a fairly high level. Some of the weakest students have fed back that they really appreciated that extra practice and the mode of the CAP quiz, that it gives you one question at a time and you keep working towards that goal. A couple of students have commented that they got quite frustrated when they were penalised for silly mistakes. For some of those students, I think that could actually be quite a useful experience for them. I think the couple of students that I heard that from may have been a little bit overconfident and kind of minimizing some of these silly mistakes. So I think that extra practice and really reinforcing, no, you need to get this correct every time, was really useful for them. So looking ahead, I think the CAP quiz can be really useful when you want to have that really focused mastery of one particular skill. So that's why I split my skills up into 3 separate CAP quizzes, because I think you want to develop through working on that one skill, like factorisation, for example. And then I think it really does target the student self-efficacy around those skills, and it has that gamification aspect, which is quite fun as well. So I'll finish there, but happy to take